All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about are instincts and drives. We're going to try to understand the difference between um, the instinct and what is a drive, and what is actually motivating us internally and externally to do the things that we do. So we have both internal and external motivators. So motive is anything that affects the way we behave and anything that affects our thinking. It's a force that leads an individual to behave in a particular way. And there's many different types of motivation that we can talk about. And there is a course at St. Thomas that covers motivation and emotion. And I heard it's a really great class. So that's something you could check out later in your school year or next school year. So the next one is an instinct. An instinct is biological or genetically endowed tendency to behave in a particular way. Its motives triggered by the environment. And most of what we do is not instinctual. Most of it is just a pure motive. But instincts are more, yeah, biologically based. Homeostasis is a maintenance of internal equilibrium. And it's this internal sense that we have for any given kind of self-regulation that we need to do. And there's several things in which we have a sense of homeostasis. So each one of the motives or motivations that we're going to talk about or instincts that we're going to talk about have their own homeostasis. And like I mentioned before, it's like an equilibrium, a balance inside your body that fulfills a need. So this instinctual need that you have is actually something internal, that equilibrium occurring throughout, and will be our body subconsciously uses self-regulation to modify this homeostasis. So whatever behavior you're doing might be to regulate that sense of being out of balance and drive you back to balance. There are two types of stimuli that impact us. So one is coming from the external environment, and this is when other organisms or physical surroundings impact us. Some of the examples that come to mind would be like the temperature. If we get too cold, we shiver and then we generate heat. The other thing is topography. So our body is regulated to understand oxygen intake, and if you go up in altitude, for example, let's say Denver, Colorado, which is called the Mile High City. It's like 5,000 feet above sea level. You definitely feel a different level of oxygen in the air when you're there. And one example that I'll bring up would be uh, when I went to visit Colorado, I went on a 6 mile run because I was training for a marathon that year. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful run, but I definitely felt the difference in oxygen. I felt like it was harder to breathe, and I felt like I was carrying like a 30-pound pack while I was running. So it's definitely harder. And so that's an example. It's an example of how our body sometimes needs to acclimate to be able to adjust to those settings. So my body, um, even while I was running, things were getting a little bit easier. I know that my body was getting used to it, but it definitely took a few days just to feel normal in general. So that's that idea of homeostasis. We also have our internal environment. So we can think about the nutrients that we need, and the amount of oxygen that we have and the water that's available in our body. All of those things are part of our internal environment. And according to the slide, concentrations of various salts in the body, and dissolved oxygen levels, and quantities of nutrients like glucose in our body can make an influence. So when that environment changes, our bodies adjust to keep our internal environment stable. A drive is internal attention, and it's our own internal drive that we experience caused from deviation from homeostasis that we need to maintain. So I talked about thirst. So feeling dehydrated is that drive to push us to drink more. And for instance, also sleep. So need for sleep is the same. So if we feel exhausted because of either some kind of something that's draining us mentally or physically, there is sometimes a buildup of substances in our brain that can lead us to a drive to sleep. I'll go back to the running example again. So I remember training for a marathon is not easy. And I remember when I would start doing my training for a marathon, I would be sleeping much more. It would be easier for me to just fall asleep at night because my body was working so much harder mentally and physically. Drive reduction is an activation that alters behavior to reduce the drive and return to equilibrium. So an example of that would be when you're cold, you shiver to generate heat. So the next part of our lecture is avoiding pain, and that's one of our instinctual drives that we have. One of our instinctual homeostasis points is to try to not be in pain. And I want to warn you in advance that this content included in this lecture does include discussion of self-harm. It's non-suicidal self-injury, called NSSI. You might know it as cutting or self-burning. And believe it or not, there are some individuals who reduce other kinds of pain that they might have um, to uh, to do this behavior. So I just want to warn you in advance that we're going to be discussing this. And if this is a problem for you, you don't have to watch this part of the lecture. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to supply you with other content or a different format that would be easier. And the content is also in your book. So if you'd rather not watch something with this content in it, you can always do that. So pain is our body's way of telling us to pay attention to something, something physical like tissue damage, or something social like rejection. I was just listening to a story on a podcast about how rejection can actually cause a reaction, a pain reaction. So that's just an instance where of many different ways we could experience pain. And there's several reasons why people might opt to increase the pain that they feel instead of decreasing it. So we'll talk about that. And pain, like I was mentioned before, is it's essentially an alarm system in our body, and we can think of it that way. It's our way our body tells us something is wrong, and it can be physical. And let's say like you're getting a vaccine, and the needle is being injected in your body, and that causes tissue damage. So therefore, your body is telling you that you're in pain. But pain can be other things too, like I mentioned, rejection. So there's emotional pain, there's social pain, um, and that could be, from a friend, from family. It could be anything. And there's something called a pain matrix. And a pain matrix is a distributed network of brain regions, including the includes the amygdala that respond to many types of pain, and it underlies both the sensory and the emotional components of pain, which give rise to the associated behavioral response, which is often to withdraw. The pain matrix underlies both the sensory and emotional components of pain. So both the physical and emotional elements that we think of when we talk about pain, those are linked. Those are linked. So relieving one of them can help and give rise to the behavioral response that we might have, like withdrawing your arm from something that's hot. Um, so because it's causing tissue damage, we would, if our hand is burning on a stove, we take it away, we withdraw. So we jerk our hand away or something like that, or like if we poke something that's sharp, we jerk our hand away from it. And that's the result of experience this activation of the pain matrix. So the pain signals that we have are really important for us to understand and experience. There's actually some individuals that for some reason the pain signals are not actually coming through to their brains. It's something they should be aware of. So they actually ignore pain. And there are individuals that wouldn't necessarily realize that their hand was burning. So if they're touching something really hot, like I mentioned before, because those signals don't connect up to the right center of the brain, they would not have that withdrawal reaction. We can think of all pain that we're having to be specific, but also general motivational role. And I'm wondering, have you ever experienced maybe like good pain, like a massage, and it's a little bit more intense that you're kind of used to expecting, but you feel like you can handle it, and maybe you dig your fingernail into your hand, like if you've injured like your knee or something, and you dig your fingernail into your hand, just kind of distract yourself to offset that pain. So that's the form that we can think of when it comes to compensation. if you can control the pain over here on this side of the body, that's going to help you deal with the pain over there on the other side of the body. So what do those pain signals tell us? Pain signals, again, tell us something general or something specific. And specifically, it tells us what's happening. And like if there's burning happening, my right hand feels like it's burning. So it gives you a very specific sensation. It helps you localize the pain. But sometimes pain is hard to localize. And so it allows you or provides you with the motivation to act. So I need to remove my hand from whatever that burning sensation is. And so we have that specific information about what's happening, but also the specific response that needs to happen. It activates a motivational network. That motivational network helps us maintain internal homeostasis of no pain, which is your body's set point. And yeah, so your body's main goal is to not be in pain. So now we can talk about acting against the instinct. So we're capable of acting against an instinct or drive, and we can actually endure pain if it's for the right reason. So, for example, if you grab some hot pads and you are bringing some cookies out of the oven, and you have it in your hands and you're bringing it over to the table or the counter, and it's extremely hot and you can feel it in your hands, but you don't want to let go because if you let go, then all the cookies fall on the floor. So you kind of endure that pain and it hurts, but you put hard work into your making those cookies, so you endure it. So that's an example that we can also tolerate pain. Another example, since I'm on the running examples today, is like on a marathon. All marathons are hard, especially the last 6 miles. If you ask a marathon runner, so it's extremely painful, and your body is giving you all kinds of signals to stop. That you're cramping and your muscles are extremely sore, but you push through it, no pain, no gain. So that's an example of pushing or enduring through that pain response. And it's not something that we should expose to ourselves too regularly. But we will do it because there's an overall goal that we want to achieve. The last example that I'll mention that comes to mind would be saving someone from a burning building. Like you'd have that pain response, of course, from something super hot if you're exposed to fire, but you have an overall goal of saving a cat or a dog that's inside or a family member. So that would be an example of acting against that instinct or drive. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to talk about is self-harm, and if again, I'm just going to do that warning that if this is something that triggers you, just be aware that I'm going to be talking about it, and do what you need to do to take care of yourself and make the decision whether you want to, and make the decision whether you want to listen to this part of the lecture. So some people experience drive or motivating factor for non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI. And this is any kind of cutting, burning, stabbing, hitting, rubbing that can be included in here that's intentional or self-inflicted. And the book says for socially sanctioned purpose, which means that you're doing it for something that society at large would say it's not worth it, but they don't necessarily understand the internal experience that a person is having at that time. So there's something called the escape from self hypothesis. And the book says that's the experience of physical pain that focuses on a person's attention on the injury they're doing to themselves and the pain they feel. And some more information on that is injury-induced narrowing or focusing of attention will decrease the person's awareness of the broader concerns. That could be negative self-view or feelings of intense hopelessness or depression. So I'll talk about that. So that escape from self hypothesis is just this idea of if I cause physical pain, then they'll lessen the attention I have on other pain that I might feel, and that decreases that person's awareness of the broader concerns like depression or hopelessness. And basically, they're able to escape time from themselves, escape from broader issues or challenges that the person was previously aware of. So the emotional pain might be so overwhelming that the person feels as if by cutting or burning or excessive rubbing can cause damage that causes damage to the skin, might lead to a reduction in pain overall because it allows them to focus on something specific, to take their minds off of whatever they're experiencing. So NSSI is actually highly prevalent and maybe more prevalent than you might think. So the report in your book says that 4 in 100 adolescents, so 4% of the population, according to your book, would experience this disorder. But there's international literature that says that NSSI actually is closer to 17%. And there's a particular Swedish study that was done during the pandemic, saw an increase in this disorder, and it says that 25% of adolescents in the study were experiencing this. It is important to be aware that things like depression, if that increases, then there could be an increase in NSSI as a result of it. So individuals will seek to escape from their experiences of pain, like emotional pain. And males and females are equally likely to experience NSSI. One thing that there needs to be more research about is non-binary individuals. There are some studies that say that non-binary individuals show a higher prevalence of NSSI, up to 70%, and that was during the pandemic. And then there really should be more information on treatments and other things like that when it comes to NSSI. But there is a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy that's happening around this. And while there's these treatments exist, less than half of the people who are actually experiencing NSSI seek help and actually go to treatment. But we know that this is more prevalent than we think about, and there are celebrities who are talking about this more and more often. So, like I've heard of Angelina Jolie, other people like Demi Lovato, Miley Cyrus, Johnny Depp, and Drew Barrymore have brought up their experience with NSSI. So there are celebrities who have actually come forward and discussed their own struggle with this challenge. So the next part of our lecture talks about pleasure, and this is obviously the opposite of pain, and we'll talk about the differences between pleasure and pain. So right now you see a symbol of a smiley face, and we think of pain as something that and we think of pleasure as something good, but it doesn't always mean that things are perfectly good because when we talk about pleasure, sometimes we need to talk about addiction because that's related to pleasure. And the reason why we might experience addiction has to do with our pleasure network, part of the brain, and how it's activated and motivated. So feelings of pleasure motivate us to continue performing certain behaviors. And it can be motivated by both internal states and external rewards. And incentives can include positive goals that we seek to achieve. In other words, there's internal and external states of awards that we might experience, and internal feeling of pleasure that we're seeking to get rewards. And there could also be external, which we'll talk about just in a moment. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. So something could be intrinsically rewarding, and so it's just being pursued for its own sake. That internal feeling of like what of would it be to experience something. And the example here is playing basketball. Like I would play basketball because for me the experience would be fun. I have that feeling internally, and no one else would be experiencing that. How I would be feeling doing that experience. The other example is like crossing the finish line for a marathon or another running race. You might say that could be they're in a lot of pain, but there's also that internal feeling of like accomplishment. And there's also intrinsically rewarding things. So that's being pursued because the rewards are not necessarily inherent part of the activity or object. So it'd be getting something that's not internally motivated and not internally reinforced. So getting paid to mow the lawn, you might pay like a high schooler to do work on your lawn or do something else. That reward, that money would be an example of an intrinsic reward. We also have to consider the difference between pleasure and pain. There's actually a huge difference when we look at the brain between pleasure and pain. So, pleasure itself has a big distinction between the anticipation of getting the reward and actually getting the reward. So, there's a huge difference between pleasure and pain. And so I'll put it like this. So anticipating pleasure is very different from getting the pleasure itself. And we have two different brain regions that are activated. Um, and so it's like the liking and actual the liking and like wanting something and the actual getting of the reward. And this is different because the pain matrix, which we talked about earlier, which there's an activation all over the brain of this pain network. Um, and that's all activated during the anticipation of pain and during the actual experience. So here you're seeing a rodent who is that's hooked up to a little machine and being provided stimulation to a reward center of their brain. So that's the liking center of their brain. And if the rodent presses the button when the correct light and only the correct light is activated, it gets a stimulation of that region of the brain. So there's two components, the wanting, and so that's the anticipation and the liking of what's being happening, actually getting the reward or receipt of the reward. And we can see that there's two regions of the brain. So this is the brain here, and we have the blue network, and that's all related to wanting. And there's some overlap between wanting and liking. From what we call the ventral tegmental area here, and to other regions like the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens to other regions of the brain. So those are all activated when we want something. And this is the same network that's activated in addiction. And when we really feel like we need something or want something, and that's different from actually receive the reward. So we have a smaller network that's activated in the areas of the nucleus accumbens, and that's also called the ventral platinum. And the ventral platinum is also receiving rewards or also receiving activation during the wanting phase, but just a smaller region of it. And both the ventral platinum and nucleus accumbens are actually activated in the liking phase, the seeking, and the reward. And you can see there that this cyclical reward activation happens. So when you're getting whatever it is, the stimulation or whatever the pathway is, you can see that it's repeatedly signaling itself in the process when you're getting the reward. And there are other areas that get activated, like the orbital frontal cortex. So what I want you to remember is the wanting and the liking are two different things within pleasure. So actually desiring the reward and desiring the pleasure and receiving the pleasure. And they're two very different things in terms of how they act within the brain. And that's different from the pain pathway that we talked about before. So the pain matrix is activated during anticipation and receipt of the pain. So I want you to think about what kind of negative consequences there are. There might be with extrinsic rewards. We talked about intrinsic rewards, so doing something for the sake of doing it or liking it, and the enjoyment that you get from it, versus the sake of doing something to get something out of it, like money or some other motivator that you might get. And this is related to operant conditioning. Remember we talked about that. So getting some kind of reward for something, and that might be some kind of secondary reinforcer. And so that could be like some kind of payment that might allow you to do something else related to something that internally that you enjoy. So what I'm wondering is it good for us to have an extrinsic reward to do something? And are there any negative consequences for us? So I'm going to show you a video and hopefully it'll help us think about this phenomena. It's about a small Ohio school that decided to start paying its students for getting good grades. So I'll show you that video.
Now, a new way to raise test scores by offering cash rewards for students who perform well. John Telenko of Learning Matters Television, which produces education stories for the NewsHour, has our report.
To gear up for this year's state test, South Lawn Elementary in Coshocton, Ohio, threw a pep rally. But this school had something more to excite students.
I want the fourth graders and the sixth graders to remember that they have the opportunity to break the bank this year.
Students who do well on the upcoming state tests will get more than high scores. They'll get huge. How much money did you get?
$100. I got $100.
Gina?
I got like 85. I got $100.
You like it?
Of course, yeah.
Coshocton, a factory town in Appalachia, uses the promise of money to motivate students to do better on state tests. The idea has caught on in other places around the nation. New York City and Baltimore just launched pilot programs. And this fall, Exxon Corporation will pay students at 67 high schools in 6 states $100 for passing advanced placement exams.
The last time we talked about Taj Mahal.
Coshocton's cash incentive program started in 2004. Inspired by a similar program in Africa, a local businessman put up $100,000 to pay for it. That was incentive enough for this cash-strapped city.
Here's a district that's willing to try new programs. In many ways, the nation's looking at this small community.
Just to give you some information on Coshocton.
Stanford University professor Eric Bettinger helped design the cash reward program that has evaluated its effects.
So much of our society now is based on incentives. What we're experimenting with here is what's something that we can do that just costs us a little bit, but hopefully gives us a bang for the buck.
Coshocton selected half the students in 3rd through 6th grades to participate in the program. Students could earn $20 for each subject test they passed, up to a total of $100 paid over the summer.
Did you ever expect that you'd be in a school that pays children?
No, that's a fast no. No, I didn't know we'd go this direction.
But South Lawn Elementary principal Francis Berg quickly saw a place for cash incentives in school.
It's hard to say to a child in 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, but you have to do this and you have to learn this. And I want you to know this because you have to get a good job. Well, getting a good job is the furthest thing from their mind. Well, if you get a good job, then you'll make good money and you can have a house and this means nothing to them. Being able to give them a little paycheck, a little bit of money now saying, see, we told you, you do really well. The money comes.
Knowing that you could get a prize, how did it change you?
It kind of makes you want to get to bed early and study hard, and you start studying more for your test, and you want to remember all the things that you learned so you can pass the test and get more money.
The kids are aware of it, and it's some of the kids are almost in a bragging type thing. Well, yep, I think I'm going to get the whole $100, and then this is what I'm going to do with it.
Coshocton has been at this for 4 years. So what are the results?
I've seen good scores.
Before cash prizes, most students at South Lawn Elementary were failing the state test. Today, South Lawn's been recognized as a high-achieving school of promise. So far, so good. But dig deeper, and the notion of paying students to learn quickly gets complicated. For one thing, research on incentives warns that prizes may interfere with learning for learning's sake.
Was the money the thing that motivated you most?
Yeah, really. It was... Oh, how can I put this? It's basically like we get rewarded for doing good in school, but just the thought of having money as doing good on your test, it motivates you more.
And our mind started functioning more because we know we're actually getting something in return.
I hope he's getting a lot more out of school than the money that he's getting in the summer. So I hope he's getting more out of it.
From the start, South Lawn teachers were reluctant to talk to students about the money.
I don't bring it up, and I don't stress it because I want them to do it for themselves, period.
It's more about me trying my best, giving my best effort.
Somewhere down the line, they need to be a good person and do things out of the goodness of their heart. It's not about the money.
What's the chances that you're going to...
Teachers had other concerns about cash rewards.
I was hesitant would it cause some friction in the classroom? Well, I got $50 and you only got 25. I'm smarter than you. That type of thing.
Mm-hmm. I thought it put too much pressure on the kids to actually perform because some kids would fold under that pressure.
We was probably so excited about the money. So the day before the test, we wouldn't actually get to sleep. We'd stay up all night thinking about it. $100, since we were little bit, it meant like thousands to us.
And when some students took the money home, more problems.
Their parents took the money. Then that kid resents the fact that, I worked really hard to get this. Now it's just taken away from me. How many times does 3 go into 20?
Some concerns about cash prizes focused on teachers.
Now,
they're already paid to motivate students.
I want to play devil's advocate. Maybe the reason that they're not motivated is you all have failed as teachers.
That could be a possibility. It's always
That
in the
weighs
back of
on
your
my
mind.
heart heavy all the time because I try to do the best I can. These are my kids, and it's not easy. And I can't say that it doesn't take too many bad teachers to turn a child off.
But circumstances here may put teachers, good or bad, at a disadvantage. In Ohio, most of the money for schools comes from local property taxes, which means that distressed towns like Coshocton have significantly fewer resources. The impact is obvious at South Lawn Elementary. It has no science lab, and the technology is outdated. The music teacher, the art teacher, and even the principal work part-time. Cash rewards don't address this lack of basic resources. If Coshocton had more resources, do you think students might be more motivated?
That's a hard question, in part because I don't know the kids well enough here. And certainly if they had better facilities, better teachers, there might be more opportunities for them, and something might resonate with them, and you might be able to get that aha experience for many children that get them really engaged in school and get them moving forward. On the other hand, here's a program where we're trying to see, look, if we put a little bit of money in, can we get a big bang?
While test scores here have gone up, to prove a big bang, paid students needed to show better results. Again, only half the students each year could participate in the cash program.
So, what were the results?
We find big effects in math. We're basically finding that math scores across the district have gone up.
What about social studies, reading, and science?
Nothing. In reading, we don't find any effect whatsoever.
But there was a startling once the offer of money was withdrawn. Last year, these students were selected for the program. This year, they were not. Do you guys miss the money?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. My grades started dropping after they told us we didn't get the money, and then I went home that night with my report card, and my mom's like, you need to bring your grades up.
Data revealed that once students were no longer eligible for cash prizes, their reading scores dropped.
If that's what the incentives does, is that it somehow erodes the student's ability to perform, then we're worried about that. So it's one of the things we're monitoring, and if needs be, there'll be a change in the program as a result of that.
Dylan, you want to do...
One change has already been made. After test scores revealed that students being paid failed to do better than students getting no prize at all, officials put a stop to cash rewards in reading, social studies, and science. This summer, Coshocton will decide whether to continue paying students in math and writing.
There is more about the cash incentive program on our website.
So I'm wondering what you think about that video. And a few questions come to mind. Do you think that paying students to come to school is a good idea? Why or why not? And what effects do you think this program would have on other students' motivation for academic achievement? That could be one of the reasons why students would be doing this. And what effects do you think this program would have on a student's learning, like the amount of knowledge they gain from their studies? So just give that some thought. One thing that came to mind was when I was in elementary school, my teacher had this program that they implemented throughout the school year, where students would get to earn money for doing certain behaviors. The money wasn't real; it was like fake money. I'm not sure if that was an experience in school, if you had anything like that. but we'd earn this money, and then by the end, by getting good scores on academic work, but also just like for good behavior. And at the end of the week or every couple of weeks, we would do like some kind of auction, and students could get rewards that were fun, like candy and all these other cool things like little toys and stuff. So, yep. I hope that this brings up some interesting thoughts. The next part of our lecture is talking about hunger and eating. So we're going to be talking about anorexia and bulimia as well. And just want to put that warning that that's going to be discussed. So we'll be looking at the physiology of hunger and eating, and there's a lot of different bodily systems that we have that actually change our motivation for certain types of food. So sometimes you're craving something. You could be craving like have sugar craving, caffeine cravings, chocolate cravings. So there's so many different kinds of cravings. But what I want to focus on is that sometimes the cravings we get are a result of being out of balance. So remember, we're always talking about homeostasis when we're talking about being out of balance in a certain way in a particular area. So that could be like we are out of balance when it comes to a particular nutrient, or that we need more water, or we're seeking more protein, or whatever it is. And that constant weight is another example of homeostasis, that our body wants to be at a constant weight. So there's something called the glucostatic hypothesis. And this hypothesis is that hunger and eating are regulated by the body's monitoring and adjustment of blood glucose levels. So an example of this is there's a study with rodents and body weight. And so there's two rats here, one that's normal size and one that's definitely not normal size. The individual rat that isn't at a normal weight had its ventral medial hypothalamus destroyed or lesioned, and that led to overeating. So we're going to talk about why this is happening in the body. Why does the body allow this to happen? And we do know that one of the things that is related to weight is glucose levels. And monitoring and adjusting the glucose levels is something that the body does to maintain weight, to maintain homeostasis. So there's certain conditions that are impacting glucose levels. So we can think about diabetes and things like that being activating or dysregulating the glucose monitoring system. So that goes into us talking about the dual center theory. And the dual center theory is from your book, the lateral hypothalamus serves as a go center for eating. So in other words, there's two regions of the hypothalamus, the lateral and the ventral medial hypothalamus. And they're essentially both based on blood glucose. But one is telling you to start eating, and that's the lateral hypothalamus. And then there's one that's telling you to stop eating, and that's the ventral medial hypothalamus. So this is one of the hypotheses that exist about how we eat and why we eat. And some individuals might weigh more than others. And the example kind of like that reinforces this hypothesis is that one rat had its part of its ventral medial hypothalamus removed and destroyed, and it led it to overeat. So in the picture, we have signals that are sent from the hypothalamus and signals that are sent back to the hypothalamus to help us understand the states of feeling hungry versus not hungry. And this regulation, this movement towards homeostasis, involves the internal balance of not needing food. And I'll talk about these two types of signals. There's one that's called the neuropeptide Y or NPY, and that gets released by the hypothalamus. And when we are hungry or we don't have enough certain nutrients, we get that signal, and it goes down to our intestinal tract and induces hunger. And that presence of neuropeptide Y is why we feel hungry. It will signal to our stomach to make that gurgling sound when we're hungry. If you experience that when you're hungry, your stomach kind of grumbles and gurgles, and it has to do with this signal that's coming into the system, this neuropeptide Y. So that's the reason why that noise happens, is there's a release of this signal, and it kind of signals the body that we need more food. And when we had sufficient food, we get a different release, and that comes from the intestinal tract. It's called CCK, and CCK is a protein released from the intestinal tract that causes us to stop eating. And you might and this, like, the signal goes to the hypothalamus and says, oh, we're all done, we don't need any more food. And maybe you've heard of this before, that some have said, like, to stop eating when you're 75% full or something like that. And that's the result of these signals not getting to where they need to be immediately. So these signals are not immediate thing. They go through our bloodstream in order to activate different regions. So sometimes it takes some time for it to get there. But it also has to do with having this sufficient amount of CCK in order to stop eating. And you might like eat more in the meantime, or you might slow down your eating, but you'll eventually get that signal. So adipose tissue plays a role too in all of this. And adipose cells are fat cells distributed throughout the body, and that includes a layer around the central nervous system to protect our brain and spinal column. We have something called the lipiostatic hypothesis, which has been proposed for a role that adipose tissue plays in the process of feeling hungry or not hungry from the food that we eat in the lip. And that signal is in the liver. And so these cells increase in size, and the fatty acids that are created by the liver cause that increase in cell size for the fat cells. And when energy levels are low, our bodies work to convert those fatty acids into glucose so we have energy available. So that's what fat is in the body. It's storing up energy for our body to use in a time when we don't have energy available to us. One of the evolutionary reasons why we have that is people who live in colder climates might have more of this insulating factor with fat in their body, and tend to gain weight during winter months and lose weight during summer months because that fat would serve as a layer of insulation for the body, like I mentioned. All right, so let's talk more about the lipiostatic hypothesis. So just a reminder that these are adipose cells and also fat cells that are distributed throughout the body. And they absorb fatty acids created by the liver and increase in size. And just remember that the energy supplies, when they're exhausted, they are reserved to fatty acids and are drained from adipose cells into the bloodstream and converted into glucose. So there's two hormones that we're going to talk about. There's ghrelin and there's also leptin. And they do something very similar to what we're talking about that was happening in the previous hypothesis, but they don't override that hypothesis. They kind of we know that these signals exist and they kind of work kind of in tandem or at the same time. What we're talking about here is regulating hunger. Just like the previous hypothesis, there's signals that are being sent in this case from the gut up to the brain to indicate hunger, and that hormone that's being used is ghrelin. And then when we've been eating, we have another signal, and that's a leptin, and that's released, as you see here in the picture. The signal goes back up. So it's released by the intestine to go to the hypothalamus, and it monitors the amount of fat storage that we have. And we talked about how fat is being stored by the liver, and this is another section of the body that we're looking at here in this picture. It actually sends signals back up to the brain, and leptin sends these signals back to the brain. We need when we need to add more food into the body in order to store more food in the form of adipose tissue or fat cells. So just like the other hypothesis we discussed, we both have a hungry and a not hungry state, and these are controlled by signals that are being sent between the digestive tract and the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is involved with our motivation roles, most of our wanting and needing types of drives and instincts. So just remember that the hypothalamus is kind of the center of all these things. So the next thing we're going to talk about is eating disorders, and a caution that we'll be talking about a sensitive subject. And within this lecture, we'll talk about anorexia and bulimia nervosa. So according to your book, anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder characterized by an extreme concern with being overweight and by compulsive dieting, sometimes to the point of self-starvation. And this can be characterized by measuring the body parts and examining oneself in the mirror, and having kind of like a false perception of what your body actually looks like, characterized by strict eating and excessive exercise and purging. So some things just to highlight is that there's that severely distorted perception of your body, and individuals who may have this disorder might see themselves in the mirror. They just don't see themselves like as we would see them. And they might frequently measure different parts of their body and examine themselves in the mirror. and see themselves as being much larger than we see them as being so. So there's this distorted perception along with that compulsive dieting, high exercise, and other characteristics that we mentioned. So there are sociocultural factors that plays a role into anorexia nervosa, and that plays a very large role. We know this because it's common in cultures that place this high need for being thin than in cultures that don't have that expectation. So we have it, for example, we have a Barbie, and this is what on the left side, what a Barbie looks like is if you take a Barbie out of the box, so the actual doll, and on the right side of the image is what a Barbie would look like if the Barbie was normal in size. So more things just when it comes to actual body shape and face proportions, and we know like the doll has certain characteristics about it, but when we actually look at just a normal female body, it's very different in how it's shaped. So this, on the right side, just a reminder, this is what it would actually look like if Barbie was regular proportions to what would a regular female look like in the same age range as Barbie and the same proportions, relatively speaking. So let's talk about health problems. We know that this dieting that comes with this disorder can lead to some really severe deficiencies. So one of them can be a deficiency in electrolytes. So this could be a dangerous deficiency in the body. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and calcium, if there's a lack of these in the body, neurons and other elements of this the body might not be able to function very well. And then also muscles and nerves need electrolytes to process sodium. So sodium, potassium, and calcium are all triggers within the nervous system and within our muscular system. And those need to be present in order for muscles and nerves to function. So the result of these electrolytes, the result of not having these electrolytes or having enough can lead to an extreme level and lead to death. So it's the same with malnutrition. If we talk about the loss of protein, the loss of sugar, the loss of other things, the body is put in a position where so much weight is lost and the body becomes malnourished, you could possibly die from this situation. So that is certainly a potential outcome of anorexia nervosa. So what causes this? We don't necessarily know the exact cause, but research shows that some of these things that might happen are that a person with this disorder might have enlarged ventricles in their brain. So you can see here, there's a brain matter, and the ventricles are the regions that hold the cerebrospinal fluid. And here we see someone with anorexia. Then, and then we have our individual who's the neurotypical control. And what that means is the brain is balanced between tissue that has the fluids and between the fluids and the brain. So it's the tissue in the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. It's the proportions of those. And that has to be in perfect balance. And if there's a loss of tissue, like we're seeing in anorexia, so a loss of brain matter, we're seeing an increase in cerebrospinal fluid. So those are the differences. I guess the main differences we see among individuals with anorexia and the neurotypical control. So again, I just wanted to bring up that the cause of anorexia is not exactly 100% clear. So we know that that starvation, some of the symptoms of that could cause these physical structure changes, but then we don't know if the mental disorder comes first and then induces that starvation. So there just needs to be more studies in this area. A study done in the 1950s looked at men and induced semi-starvation points in those men for 6 months. So they reduced their food and induced semi-starvation points. So they reduced their food intake and their calorie intake by 50% for those 6 months. And the symptoms, and looked at the symptoms that it produced. So these are all symptoms that we talk about in anorexia. So preoccupation with food, erratic moods, impaired cognitive performance, physiological changes. So you can see decreased body temperature in these individuals happens as well. Some other things that happen is they might hoard food or non-foods. So there's hoarding in general. And sometimes these individuals become withdrawn or isolated. Those are some other symptoms as well. And it also leads us to wonder whether starvation can actually induce the symptoms of anorexia nervosa, kind of like what I was mentioning before, or whether these two things are just related or not necessarily a causal factor of one or the other. So let's say, let's just bring up one study that looked at rats and access to food for a very limited time. So if we limited their ability to eat food, let's say just by an hour a day, and they get access to food and then they don't, and we spend time with those rats, given access to exercise equipment, those rats will spend time more exercising than the individuals that don't have that limited amount of food. So when rats have free reign and free access to food all day long, they can this can be related to that NPY that we talked about earlier. So we find high levels of neuropeptide Y in individuals. And so talking about humans, individuals who have anorexia, when we've induced a state of starvation or induced decreased access to food, that limiting in terms of number, and we limit that in terms of numbers of hours per day, then we see these increased levels of MPY. And that being related to the exercising or over exercising that I talked about with you when it comes to those experiments done on rats. So if you increase the levels of MPI in rodents, then you might increase their levels of exercise or amount of exercise. So we see these symptoms to be related. So there is also found to be some genetic factors. So according to studies, 58 to 70%, and 70% of the variability of occurrence in anorexia is related to genetics. So above 50% is for sure due to genetic variation. Now, I just want to clarify, it doesn't mean that an individual who develops necessarily has genes that lead to the cause of it, but it does mean that there could be a genetic predisposition or underpinning that can lead to higher rates of anorexia and lead to anorexia nervosa. So those genetic factors are not exactly been identified particularly, but from study to study, it seems to change which genes are being noted as being related to anorexia. So we know that incidence of anorexia nervosa are higher in individuals who went through possibly a complicated delivery, or maybe experienced some birth trauma, or individuals who are born prematurely. That could be a possible cause, but we're not 100% sure and of the potential causes. So what treatments are available? Cognitive behavioral therapy has been widely used and shown to be pretty effective in these cases. And then also interpersonal psychotherapy. And that means like dealing with these challenges in small groups, individuals who are experiencing this. And then there's a new type of treatment called the Maudsley approach. And this is also family involved. Essentially, it includes like family picnics, and what they'll do is they'll have a food dinner that's provided for all the individuals, and then it's observed by a therapist, and they just look at the family dynamics that are happening while they have the dinner, and then there's sessions, one-on-one sessions, the client, the individual with anorexia. We talk about what was experienced during those family picnics and other times as well, and their experience with other things that are happening in their life. And so it's more of an enhanced level of kind of combining family therapy together with cognitive behavioral therapy. This is an out-treatment patient option. There's no inpatient hospitalization for this type of treatment. So when thinking about these treatments and the symptoms of anorexia, we find that there's connections with internal motivation and homeostasis. So that drive center we've been mentioning in the middle of the lecture. So those are just all things that are related to hunger and connected to anorexia. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is bulimia nervosa. And again, just going to remind you that this may be a trigger for some individuals. So I just want to let you know that there's some sensitive material in what I'm going to be talking about. So bulimia nervosa is an eating disorder, and just like anorexia, it's characterized by a cycle of binge and purge eating. So eating a lot and then reducing it. and reducing that load either by vomiting or some kind of compensatory behavior that we see. We'll talk about. And individuals with this disorder often have very normal body weight, and they might still have distorted images of their own self. So you won't necessarily be able to tell someone with bulimia nervosa just by looking at them. So because of this purging behavior, we see that there is deficiencies in electrolytes. And we know that self-induced vomiting actually brings up stomach acid and other things like that that can lead to changes in dental enamel and make your teeth look yellow or worn. So a result of this increase in stomach acid can also be moved through the body and cause erosion of gums and result in things like that. So prevalence of eating disorder. So in the United States, women are twice as likely than men to have an eating disorder. So when looking at the data for non-binary individuals who are assigned female at birth and transgender individuals, they tend to have a higher risk of eating disorders in general than cisgender females. And that data is highly inconsistent, and it's only a recent thing that's being studied. So one thing to gather from this is that individuals who are non-binary might have a higher prevalence of eating disorders than individuals who fall into the binary patterns. So we see roughly half of the eating disorders are prevalent in men. Now, this might be actually a result of a lack of self-report of men actually having an eating disorder. We know the same thing with depression happens. Females are more likely to report depression and anxiety and any other mental disorder than men. Men are less likely to report in a binary world some of this prevalence, or less likely to report those kinds of disorders. So what could be the causes of bulimia nervosa? There are some hypotheses that are out there that might lead to this. Almost all of them seem to be related to serotonin and the underactivity of serotonin in the body. We know that serotonin is related to mood, and serotonin, we talk about it a lot when it comes to depression and anxiety. And that's not the only neurotransmitter that we can talk about with anxiety and depression. There's others, but it does look like it's serotonin is related to bulimia nervosa. So some of the things that we find is that serotonin levels can be altered by what we eat. And so there might be some kind of behavioral manifestations for the lack of serotonin in the body. And then we can think about the mood and appetite control that could be related to each other. And then there's also different kinds of depression. And with all those factors, talking about all those factors, binging and purging might actually be used to alter the mood of the individual. So alter that mood of what they're experiencing. There's some academic research that looks at bulimia nervosa in some ways as a sense of self-control. So you might be out of control when you're binging, but when you're purging, it's a sense of control. It's very complicated to summarize these things in just a few slides. So I'm just going to read two statements that can help us make sense of these things. So first, we see an increase in tryptophan from carbohydrate-rich meals. It does not have to have an adequate effect on serotonin mediated transmission because the individual has too few neurons related to serotonin. Tryptophan is a pathway to make serotonin. So you frequently hear things like tryptophan as a result of eating a lot of turkey on Thanksgiving. And then we get sleepy because we eat so much turkey and because it has so much tryptophan in it. Well, tryptophan and serotonin are in the pathway, and there are ways we can convert tryptophan into serotonin. So what I'm saying is that when we eat a lot of carbohydrates and we get a lot of tryptophan from a meal, we might not have enough neurons in the pathway to use the serotonin that we have as well. So we could basically, through binging, increase massively the amount of serotonin that we have. But if there's not enough neurons for serotonin to act on, we actually don't experience that much change in mood as a result of this. And there's also another hypothesis, another way to think about this. So the hypothesis is that the brain might not actually respond the way it should to changes in food and the plasma level because of something that's wrong with the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier protects the brain from an infusion of inappropriate things, And there might be something in the blood-brain barrier of individuals who have bulimia nervosa that doesn't allow serotonin or anything else that's moving in the blood of those individuals based on food they've taken in to actually get to the brain. So serotonin might not be getting to the blood to the brain and might be leading to some changes that we see in individuals that have bulimia nervosa. So that could be a potential cause. Recent studies have shown that the genetics may have up to a 60% factor in whether someone will have this disorder. So basically, what they looked at in these studies was looking at the chromosomal variation of these individuals compared to others who did not have the disorder. And then they noticed that that bulimia nervosa can develop in the absence of this variation. So treatment options, there's two different types of treatment, and we talked about them both with anorexia nervosa. Just like anorexia nervosa, they're frequently used together. So cognitive behavioral therapy allows individuals to work one-on-one with a therapist and look at the negative thoughts they have about their own appearance and other things along these lines, um, and work on changing eating behaviors. Another one is interpersonal psychotherapy, and that's like group psychotherapy. So it allows individuals to improve relationships that they have and think about how their disorder might impact those relationships and kind of learn to work within those relationships to improve things.